So without more ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Mark Cliff, the Managing Director of Ageas. I'm not going to go through all the biographies of all the speakers because you've got them in your packs. So I would just say that Mark Cliff is a very active a member of the Association of British Insurers, where he chairs the travel committee and is involved particularly with liaison with motor manufacturers. And he's going to talk to us this morning about tackling fraud and getting fraud to receive more focus in a tight margin environment. So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Ros. As she's already said, my name's Mark Cliff. I'm Managing Director of Ageas Insurance Limited. I'm also a member of the UK board for Ageas, and part of what I want to get across in the 20 minutes today is how important an issue fraud is at board level. I'm going to cover three things. Firstly is tackling fraud receiving more focus in a tight margin environment. I have to say I didn't know there was another environment, but there you go. The advantages of embedding anti-fraud strategy across the company, and does taking an even tougher approach to fraud give insurers competitive advantage? So those are three areas I'm going to cover, and clearly in 20 minutes very quickly. It is good to know that I've just had a text saying I can get £5,000 for my latest accident that I've never had, so that's quite good news. That is the record so far that text I've had, and beats my wife, which is even better. So, is tackling fraud receiving more focus? I think there's been a fair amount of debate about the statistics that are being produced to say, is there more fraud, or are we just better at detecting it? I think the reality that everyone would say intuitively, we're seeing more fraud. How you define that, I'll come on to talk about. But clearly, when you look at the statistics, and I don't intend to walk through these, because most of you will have seen these before, they are worrying for any board. And clearly, you know, certainly our non-executive directors place a great deal of emphasis on what actions are we taking as an organisation to counter fraud. And I think for me it's the bottom line here, that fraud adds an average of £44 a year to the insurance premium of every UK policyholder. That in itself is the sort of one of the key rationales as to why we need to have an anti-fraud strategy and why we need to aggressively attack this issue. And in reality, fraud can wipe out an entire company's profits in 1 year. And if people remember when the aggregators first started, I think insurers' lack of understanding about the sophistication and how the aggregators worked demonstrated, if you look at some of the profits that got destroyed during that learning period. So this isn't just a minor sideshow issue. This has the potential, in the same way as a catastrophe event, to have a major impact on the profit flows of the organisation. And that's why it sits firmly at the board table, whether that's at an operating company level, whether that's at a UK level or at a group level. We have to, I think one of the things, the results clearly of the benefits of attacking fraud, again, you know, these statistics you can all read, obtain from the ABI. I think one of the things we discuss, and it's a slight dilemma, is what do we mean by fraud? And we like to distinguish between organised fraud, and boy, they're the people we're going to get, and those are the people we're really, as someone said at the outset, take to prosecution. But equally, what we see more and more, particularly in this economic environment, are what we would term exaggerated claims. They're not professional fraudsters. I like to give the story of, to our people of the guy who sent a claim in for a TV and video that he said had been stolen. We asked for proof that he actually owned the TV and video, and he sent a photograph. Fantastic. And that would have been great, except next to the TV and video was his telephone table, and on the telephone table was a pad. And on the pad was actually the number of the claims negotiator that he could only have got after registering the claim. Now, these sorts of people, we have a phrase internally that we get them to withdraw with dignity. And there is this dilemma of, do you go for, zero tolerance, or are, people who view that their insurance policy has to, should have a pound-per-pound value in what they claim for to even things out? Well, where do you draw the line? And I think part of any fraud strategy has to be very clear about how it chases organised fraudsters, how it deals with people who exaggerate claims, but also the genuine claimants. And we know in the past, I think we've all learned, there are some methods that were introduced, particularly around things like conversational management, where pretty much a lot of genuine customers felt they were being treated like fraudsters. So I think the balance in any strategy is critical. Undoubtedly, the war on fraud has picked up pace. And we're seeing a lot of good initiatives. If anyone's seen the trailer, there's a new film coming out called Battleship, and within it, Liam Neeson, who's the ship's commander, and it says, when they're being attacked, fire weapons. And somebody comes back and they said, which ones? And he said, all of them. I do think that's now where we are as regards attacking fraud. I think over the last few years there has been a number of almost piecemeal activities. Should we look at it at the claim stage? Should we look at it at point of sale? Should we look at it, more holistically? I think the answer is we have to look at every element of the customer touch point. And you can see the good initiatives, the Insurance Fraud Register, Insurance Fraud Enforcement Department, and you can see there 658 arrests and 162 convictions, and a targeted fraud saving of 60 million over 3 years. And we can see it's really making a difference in attacking the organised claimants. And they're the people that we really do need as a necessity to get to and deal with. In addition, we're seeing that the government are now realising that, whiplash claims, the number of fraudulent whiplash claims, and hopefully in the future we'll see some legislation that will help us cut those down, cut them out. And clearly, if anyone read the Daily Mail article from the lady who was targeted in a shunt to be met by somebody getting out the car, had already got their name, insurance details already written down, and was claiming that there was 3 or 4 people in the car who'd all got whiplash injuries, then you know that the frustration of genuine customers in these instances. The landscape is changing, and it was said earlier on, I think initially fraud was viewed as a claims problem. Certainly when I was at AXA, we liked to blame it on David Williams. That was very easy to do. But it has changed. And you now really have to look at, across the landscape from underwriting through to claims, about how you deal with it. We're seeing in distribution, we have to look at our distributors more carefully, about levels of fraud, ghost broking, as people talk about. Application fraud. You'll have that industry guru, Martin Holman, who's recently written in Insurance People about the application of dishonesty, and I'm sure Martin will touch on more of that later on today. I was actually with a broker a few months ago who spent a lot of money investing in technology to deal with information on the aggregator, and they showed me a great example of a guy who, there was a clue in his email address where he was called DJ Kevin, who started off by saying he was a DJ on the aggregator. Clearly that gave the wrong price. He then became a doctor, and he changed it 3 or 4 times until he found what he thought was clearly the right price. And at that point, they phoned him to say, "You're not really a doctor, are you?" So But that's, you know, an example of application fraud, that the aggregator is so easy for people to change a piece of information to say, you know, that will give me a slightly better price. I won't ask how many people in this room have actually done that ever, because that would be too embarrassing. But I'm sure if you know, speak to people, they believe that if they're not on the end of a phone, then it's more difficult to be rumbled. And that's a key element of the application fraud. And fraud is becoming more sophisticated. Multiple claimants, you know, I've talked about the texts from accident management companies. We also, you know, you look at, we've just had an instance where, and they always look for the soft spots. We've got a scheme where there's no deposit required on a direct debit. We didn't find the fraud until the claim stage, when 47 dead people made claims. But they keep looking for the soft spots and it is sophisticated. It is an industry, and it's an industry we've got to kill off. At the bottom there, you'll see socially acceptable fraud behaviour. I think there is a bit that people do view it as socially acceptable, that, you know, to get a little bit more money out of their insurance company, and some people are quite proud about telling you that until they find out you're in insurance. But, you know, the good example is, you know, the new iPad is coming out. I am waiting for the numbers of iPad 2 and original iPads that suddenly hit the kitchen floor or accidentally go down the loo. And I can tell you, every time there is a new technological advancement, along comes a number of claims as people try and use their insurance policy to upgrade. So it isn't just a claims issue, it's the vigilance at looking at your distributors and the way that they operate, it's vigilance in looking at underwriting at point of sale, and it's vigilance at the claim stage. So what are the advantages of embedding an anti-fraud strategy across every part of the company? People normally quite often look at this as is it underwriting or is it claims? We like to look at it from have we got the right processes? Have we got the right technology? Have we got the right people doing the right things? We believe that will drive business performance. And not only are we looking at external fraud, we have to look at internal fraud. And again, that's something that we mesh those two things together. If I start with process, 3 key phrases, words for us that we use: block, validate, and reward. And this forms the basis and the way that we look at our processes. How do we block unwanted customers at point of quote? How do we validate that customers are who they say they are? And how do we reward genuine customers? And how do we discount premiums? And we use this as a way of designing our processes around those 3 words. If we look at process and then move on to technology, clearly there is a lot of technology emerging in the market looking at helping you to identify fraud. Many people are here today, Sira, who we know, and you know, provide a way of you being able to get syndicated data to check whether people have a flag has been raised around fraud previously. And that's not to say they're necessarily a fraudster, but it puts you on alert. So there is more data than there's ever been. And you can see here, Redeye, Sira, Q, front-end technology. Don't ask me to explain what this T-leaf service tick. There is a number of authenticates. You know, and brokers are using information, particularly when working with aggregators, to identify whether the information is being changed or whether it's correct. And indeed, again, I was another broker who was using Google Street Maps to check things like when people say they've got a garage, do they have a garage? When they said their house was of a certain construction, certain type, was it? These things can be checked now. And you can't just do that by employing the technology. You have to marry the processes and mesh them together. And I think that's really important. I think people sometimes think that you can take technology and that will solve the issue. It's how you embed it within the organisation, how it becomes part and parcel of the customer journey, and part and parcel, therefore, of every handler that works in the organisation. Telematics as well is something now that is emerging, that the technology within telematics will allow you to detect whether fraud is being carried out. We had a great example recently, a young guy who said he'd been hit in a supermarket car park. That was entirely true. That was the only statement that was true, because when we took the information from the telematics, he'd actually been doing donuts in the snow at 10:30 at night in an empty supermarket car park and hit his mate. But that was a good example of somebody saying that, you know, they've been shunted in a busy car park during the day and the technology can prove. So I think that it's not so much the technology, it's the fact we're becoming more data rich. And for me, one of the new battlegrounds in our industry is data. Not only from combating fraud, but also as regards pricing. So I think data, the management of it, the collection of it, is absolutely critical. And those people who cannot do it will be those people that will be selected against and will be picked on. And the final element is people. And it is how processes, technology, and people work together. It is a collaborative approach amongst not only with our staff, with the industry, and all our suppliers, is that everyone has to be on the lookout for fraud. We have a good example, a firm who fits telematics boxes actually feeds back information to say were the risk details correct that were filled in. But it's another example. We've had 2 or 3 occasions where they've not been. And that's another way. And it's how we work together. We have an approach. We don't have we have an investigations team, but what we believe is that everyone in the company needs to be trained to understand and spot fraud. So every claims handler, everybody in the underwriting teams, we put everybody through fraud training. And the reason is that we don't think it's not just a claims issue anymore. And we have to, every customer touch point, make sure that people are trained. So we do feel that collaborative approach, even in the post room, believe it or not, we ask that people in the post room, if they spot things like letters being returned from addresses, how can they flag that to somebody as part of saying maybe there's something not quite right there. So I do think that it is the duty to train, educate the whole organisation. And that's not to say, for them to chase shadows, but to say there are certain little things, inconsistencies, that maybe just to raise a flag, to say we need to look at this. So I do think that as far as an embedding a strategy, it is a combination of making sure have you got the right processes, incorporating that sort of looking at anti-fraud. Have you got the right technology that will help you analyse the data that you've got in the organisation? And all of us have stacks of data. The challenge is being able to analyse it. And have you got the right people? Have you got people who are tuned in, aware of what they need to be thinking about, looking about, that becomes part of their everyday work? Because if it isn't part of what they do day on day, then frankly, things will slip through. So that's our approach to it. And brokers and insurers are increasingly working together to look at block and validating. And we now provide to brokers to say, hey, if you can do all of these things at point of sale, we will give discounts to you. So now it starts to become a process about how do we reward the right customers? How do we reward brokers for doing the right things as far as looking at validation? And you'll all be attuned with these. And my final point is, does take an even tougher approach to fraud give insurers a competitive advantage? At the end of the day, competitive advantage, the benefits include an improved loss ratio, well, we say that, more competitive pricing, an improved customer journey. But ultimately, this is a short-term view. We have to work together as an industry to deal with this issue. We have to work collaboratively in order and share data in order that we can wipe this out. Otherwise, we just put a sticking plaster over it and the problem moves somewhere else. So, as I said earlier, I think the new battlegrounds are people and data. Can you get the people doing the right things, and can you make sure that you're analysing your data? You can't ignore fraud. My message to you from a board level is it's not going to go away. You have to act, and it has to be high on your board's agenda. And if it isn't, then you need to get it onto the agenda, because this issue will only grow in the present economic recession, and we will see that they will always go to the weakest point in the chain. We can only deal with that by working together. So thank you very much indeed.